Good morning once again, and thank you for staying tuned to Sunrise at Sea right here on CTV. We continue the conversation on the Twitter jabs too. And today we are discussing World Press Freedom Day. In studio with me, our friends to the show, and this is Council Gawayo Tegule. How are you? Good to see you.
Pleasure. Thank you for welcoming me again in this place.
Thank you so much. Well, he's a veteran journalist and a human rights lawyer. And then next to him is Mr. Magola Moses, and he's the Deputy Executive Director, Human Rights Network for Journalists in Uganda. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for honoring my invitation.
Thank you. It's my debut, I think, on CTV.
Happy World Press Freedom Day. Should I say that? Is it appropriate to say that?
Thank you. It is because it's such a critical day in the calendar of the media world, and it's when we generally converge to commemorate, a day that enables us to reflect on progress, remember those who have lost their lives
in the work of duty.
Yeah, because this is not an easy profession.
Yes.
It comes with a lot of risks, and many colleagues have gone that way. And of recent, I think, in the war in Russia and Ukraine, quite a number. I think the latest I heard was 6.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is a day worth celebrating, and when we come together, we are able to give reminders to all the perpetrators out there and to all the people that really care about this profession.
Yes.
Yeah, that journalists play a critical role.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this year's World Press Day Freedom theme is journalism under digital siege. Council Tekule, is journalism under digital siege? Do you think this theme is relevant for the theme this year?
What do they mean by digital siege, exactly?
They mean that the forms of communication these days which journalists use, and that is with the digital outlets, that social media, online, are being, controlled by, say, the state and different masses. So do you think it is the case?
I think that's a difficult question because, we live in very exciting times. When I began journalism 27 years ago, it was a whole lot different.
Yes.
We had just the simple newspapers and magazines and radio and television. And I could point to guys who were there before me, who were there at the time when we had one radio, one newspaper, and one TV in those days. So a lot has changed, and we're seeing, we're living in very exciting times. Every day you wake up, there's new technology, there is new frontiers for engagement, and that means there's new opportunities as well. And that also means that the freedom is being enhanced by the level of technology.
Yes.
It means people have access. Most people in many places have, a lot of people in many places have a lot of freedom because the law is not running as fast as the technology.
All right.
Law is constantly behind.
Yes.
So the desire to regulate, to control, always comes after, when the state or the states realize that people have more freedom, more latitude, then they want to come in and control. But we've seen, I think, across the world that the technology is moving far faster than the law.
Yes.
So the law has to keep on catching up. And but again, we've seen that there has been a tendency by many governments to impose controls even without the law.
Yes.
I've seen even our dear UCC here. I keep laughing at them a lot of the time. They're, saying if we get you using Facebook, it is illegal. If you do this, I'm like, heck, where do you even get the authority to babble such nonsense? Because you don't have a law that actually favors you in that regard, and would be happy to challenge UCC in the courts of law, because they are simply bulldozing people without any authority of the law. And but you see that across the board in many places. So I think that is something to ruminate upon and say, okay, if the technology is moving faster than the law, can we have governments respect the fact that you cannot take action in the absence of a policy which is enforced by a law?
Yes.
Can we maybe advocate for that so that there is a rule of law? Rule of law simply means there is a law and it is governing it's regulating. First of all, it is making the conduct of the people regulated predictable. That I can, by looking at the law, then know what to do and what not to do. And then you, the regulator, you, the government, can then impose sanctions or whatever regulations you want according to the law. Now we're seeing a situation where there is no law and then guys are coming in to impose themselves.
Yes.
And we're saying that is wrong and we must condemn it in the strongest terms possible. I'm hoping that at the same time when we get laws that cover the gap, because every time technology goes here, then the law must catch up. When the law is trying to close the gap there, I'm hoping that we can have laws that are people-friendly and people-centered and freedom enhancers rather than restrictors.
All right. So how do we close that gap? Because with this year's theme, it puts a spotlight on the multiple ways in which journalism has been endangered by surveillance and, digital mediated attacks on journalists and the consequences on all of that on, the public's freedom of expression. Because it's not only just for journalists this day, it's about everybody having the right to exercise their freedom of press. So how do we close that gap? How do we put laws? How can we make our laws, work as fast as the digital era? Should we create more jobs? Should we?
Two things I want to emphasize.
Yes.
Every time we talk about press freedom,
yes,
I think people must understand that the freedom of the press is the freedom of the people.
Yes.
If you look at all the legal instruments across the world that talk about press freedom, they say including press freedom. They don't say press freedom per se. So in other words, the laws are broad. They cover all people everywhere, because when we talk about press freedom, we're talking about freedom of information. We're talking about the freedom to impart, the freedom to receive.
Yes.
And that means that the freedom of the press is the freedom of the people.
Yes.
That as media, we don't get news for our own benefit. We get it to disseminate it. Every time you limit a journalist, it means you're not only restricting his right to impart the information, you're limiting the right of the publics to receive that information.
Yes.
And that is why if you look at the entire legal framework, if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, Article 18 talks about freedom of thought and conscience and belief.
Yes.
And then Article 19 talks about freedom of expression, which includes freedom of the media. If you again you look at 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it also talks about in Article 18 the freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. And then Article 19 again touches freedom of expression. If you look at the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, again also does the very same thing. Article 8 touches freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. Article 9 touches freedom of expression, which they say includes freedom of the media, the freedom to give and to receive. If you look at Article 29, 1A of our Constitution, it talks about the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Article 129, 1B then touches the issue of a thought, conscience, and belief. So across the board, we're seeing if you look at the hierarchy of laws, clearly we have people everywhere have the right to speak and to be spoken to get information, to disseminate it, to process it any way they want. So every limitation that is imposed by governments must be that which is reasonable and demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society, as articulated by our Article 43(2) of the Constitution of Uganda. Now, we need to make sure that we have a broad consensus as a nation, that whatever laws are being made are people-centered. You cannot have government make laws just because they suit their interests. I think that's why we're having a problem. And people must push for this. We want to see you, the media, at the forefront of pushing this. But no. Why am I saying the media? I'm saying we should say everybody, the media and the people, and wherever they are, because freedom of expression and speech is across the board. It's about people everywhere, not just the media. The media is just a small group that has the benefit of being specialized, and they're able to go out and gather the news, or if you like information, process it, and then disseminate it. But everybody everywhere must be involved.
All right. So, Mr. Magola, I would like to ask you, what is freedom of speech? Because a lot of people, it's a word that we hear, a phrase that we hear going around all the time. I have the freedom to express myself. I have the freedom to thought. I have the freedom to impart knowledge, or whatever the case may be. But many times people get themselves in trouble because of this expression of freedom. So what is that to you?
Of course, it's a right derived from the instruments that are already available. Globally, like some of those he has hinted upon, and the mother of them all is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and therein there is that article, famous Article 19, that provides that freedom, in its entirety, and the other subsequent covenants that came about, and then domestically, our Constitution is the mother of all laws, and it is therein very well explained. So it's a right that basically is supposed to be enjoyed by everyone, although I have to say it comes also with restrictions. Yeah, it's not an absolute right, because it's only 4 other rights which are absolute. So it comes with limitations, and that is where perhaps we have always gone wrong. And that is the limiting aspect is where the leaders, political leaders, tend to kind of come in and capitalize on that. But that is mainly because of the limited push from the people, and the limited knowledge and understanding of what these freedoms are to them. So at the end of the day, that limited knowledge tends to be a key kind of driver of perpetration of abuses and violations that we tend to see. So at the end of the day, it is a fundamental human right, and these human rights accrue to everyone, and they must be enjoyed without limitation, and they must be facilitated. People must be facilitated to enjoy these rights, which unfortunately is not the case in contexts like ours and the wider sub-Saharan Africa, and the rest of the world, especially the developing world. This right of expression that by extension is giving us this day that we are recognizing today tends to be not to be respected by many of these governments in the developing world, and therein lies, a huge problem, and this is where we need to all gather and put our voices together and continuously speak, and it gives the whole significance of this day that the whole world is looking at specifically these press freedoms that emanate from that freedom.
All right, I saw a very beautiful tweet from a Kenyan online blog, and it's the Kenya Editors Guild, and it asked a very beautiful question. It says, how can Africa build solidarity movements to entrench media freedoms and freedom of expression? Now, last week on Friday, the World Press Freedom Index was held, and Uganda still sits at a very low position, and that's at 125. Burundi, South Sudan, Rwanda also doing very badly, whereas Tanzania and Kenya are doing a lot better than we are in press freedom. So how can we as Africans, or as the East African community, build solidarity movements to entrench, media freedoms? Council. Or would you like to go first, Mr.
It's his debut. He needs to speak more.
He needs to, so how can we do that?
Number one, this effort requires to be multi-stakeholder,
Yes.
We cannot kind of cocoon ourselves as people in the journalism sector to push, because in legislating you require parliamentarians, you require all other policymakers to support you. You require other voices of other international actors,
yes,
who even operate in who are representatives in the country, like these international organizations.
Yes.
The UNESCOs of this world, UNDP. So an effort like that requires like a broad kind of consensus being generated, and unfortunately, I want to in the African context, I want to agree with the brother there, because there are limited collaborative efforts,
yes,
that we tend to see, and that gives leeway to the abusers to take advantage, because there is a lot of silencing of voices, and if these voices are out there speaking more, imagine if the country office, UNESCO or UNDP and the UN, they are speaking more about violations, and all the other development partners, if consistently they are part and parcel of this, and injecting resources to actors, especially in these developing countries,
yes,
which don't do well in terms of resources, because most of them, the excuse they give is having sufficient resources to gather the partners across, yes, to come and deliberate on their country situations. So solidarity can only be boosted by a multi-stakeholder approach that is very well resourced,
yes,
yeah, by the different actors across the board, both state and non-state actors coming together, which unfortunately is not happening. But for us in East Africa, I think we have a huge vacuum. We used to have the East African Journalists Association, EAJA, but it has since collapsed. Panos East Africa, since collapsed. And you can't do much. So at the African level, we have the African Freedom of Expression Exchange, and that's it. And there is also the editors platform,
yes,
the editors guild on the continent. But how often do these people come together to do reflections? As we talk, I think right now we are all involved in the digital platform now, UNESCO conference that is ongoing, yes, and we are all looking at the event going on in Uruguay.
Yes.
We should be having an African kind of conference, yes, to discuss and deliberate on what's going on, and that explains why we are doing so badly in Africa. The rankings are a good testament.
Yes.
And Uganda, we are not really at the right end. Freedom, it is called the Freedom House, which is America-based, ranks us as not free.
Yes.
Journalists Beyond Borders ranks us at 125, like you said.
Yes.
Our index here we did last week as a Human Rights Network for Journalists also brings out a not so rosy picture. It's a bad picture. 131 cases of violations of human rights. That's the higher end. They should be essentially really below 50.
Yes.
Or even we should go without. But 131 is still up,
yes, and
the police accounts for the highest number of all those.
That's true.
So we need to do a lot. Unfortunately, there are so many fault lines. The fractures within this industry,
yes,
both local and internationally, really require a lot of, I think, pulling in the same direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you did mention that the police are the biggest perpetrators of or perpetrators of not allowing freedom of expression or press freedom. So, Council, I'd like to ask you, even with freedom of expression, he said that there are limitations towards it. So where is the problem? Is it that there isn't enough professionalism being practiced on both sides, on security with police and in journalism? Could it be that both ends of the spectrum are not, following proper procedures and protocols and then end up clashing?
I think the bigger problem, of course, we're looking at imperfections on both sides, which are inevitable every time you have human beings involved. But I want to emphasize that in enforcing human rights, the courts consider the benefit of the advancement and enhancement of human rights over the limitations.
Yes.
The intention of the Constitution, the intention of the covenants we've seen at international and regional level are for the purposes of enhancing freedom, not limiting it.
Yes.
And therefore, that must be the approach we consider. Now, when somebody is exercising their freedom, I think we should look at, government should be considering ways of enabling them to enjoy this freedom. This freedom is not given by government. It's not granted by the government. It's only recognized by the government.
Yes.
And it's supposed to be protected by the government,
yes,
not limited. And so the approach by government should be one of enhancing and not limiting.
Yes.
Now the problem we're having is that we have governments in sub-Saharan Africa especially that set out to, by default, limit these rights, make prohibitions and negative declarations and impositions on the exercise of liberty, the exercise of these freedoms,
yes,
the exercise of human rights. And we're saying this is wrong. The bulk of the abuses we're seeing in this spectrum is by the security agencies. What's their problem? Most of them are basically trying to ensure that the governments in power stay in power.
Yes.
They are cracking down on dissent. They want the media, they want the press to be like a big choir that is singing one song in universal praise and acclaim of the ruling government. And those things only happen in North Korea. Those things should only happen, only happen in North Korea. They should not that they should happen there, but that's the things that happen in China,
yes,
in Cuba, nowadays in Russia. I think they're getting to that level. I'm saying that is wrong because by nature, actually, if you look at the very first Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, said all human beings are born free and equal in dignity.
Yes.
That's the bottom line. Therefore, people should be free to do what they want within the parameters of clear and friendly legislation. So we are seeing a problem that governments, for the sake of staying in power, will do anything to limit the enjoyment of these rights. I'm just saying, as people, we need to speak out. I want to, on this day, remember those who have been tortured because of expressing themselves. I want to stand with my brother Kakwenza Rukirwa Seige, who is in exile right now. Why? Because he spoke out against the first son, Mr. Muhoozi Kainerugaba, and then he was tortured beyond measure. If you look at his accounts, that is sad. It shows how low people have sunk just because they don't agree with those who are speaking against them. Those in power must consider the moment you're up there, you're a target. You must feel free to be criticized, to be critiqued. You must feel free to be disagreed with. You can't begin cracking down on people just because they don't agree with you. So on this day, let us reflect deeply on the conduct of those who held power in this country. Political power, political power like Mr. Museveni, military power like his son, police authority. I think that goes across the board. Poor policemen, I think I don't want to blame them too much because they're under instructions. But this is, Paul was telling, I think, the Philippians, he said, my brethren, these things ought not so to be.
Yes.
Say, this is not how things are supposed to be. And I want to tell Mr. Museveni, I want to tell General Muhoozi, these things ought not so to be. What you're doing is wrong, and this must stop.
All right. So what about some notable achievements in press freedoms in Uganda? Are there any? Have you cited any? Are we on the right track? Are we improving? How well are we doing as opposed to the years before? Yes, Mr. Bagola, go first.
I will come in before my senior brother.
Yes.
I think progressively, in fact, the trend doesn't reflect a positive kind of trajectory.
Really?
Progressively.
Explain.
Because we tend to be getting from the good to the bad.
How so?
Although we have been conditioned to think that in terms of quantity, having many media houses and these platforms, is what it means that we are really achieving. Well, there are also some, you can point at certain positives, although they are so much outweighed by the negatives going about when it comes to enjoying these freedoms as we audit our progress. When you look at where we were in the 90s, that liberalization of the space was later on kind of followed up with another trend of these repugnant laws that came about that tend to restrict the space, So that is not good progress. If you are opening up space, let it be genuine enough and come up with enabling laws like Council is saying.
Yes.
Although the laws, even the press and journalists
Statute.
Act alone is so restrictive if you ever look at it. We are contesting it in court, unfortunately. Also the prosecutors put it aside.
What are some of the clauses that you are protesting against?
The issues to do with the licensing, this annual registration of people. I mean, this is something which people have to get in and practice. It's a profession you've learned at school. You don't have to apply for a license and asking for money. Some contentious clauses and setting up of certain institutions which they have failed up to now to ever set up. So I think there is a process to review that, but it's being challenged in court.
Yes.
So that law is not so much kind of supportive, and I'm sure Gawaya was part of the process that kind of mothered the formulation. At that time there was a lot of debate, but that law, as is not as supportive. There are others, like...
Why? Oyaga kunsibako matugambuzi. I wasn't part of the process. I was nowhere near that process. I must say.
I mean, it's their generation. Yeah, I mean...
it came up in our times, that is true.
I made it in the context of the generation, I thought, because many people were so much involved, most of the senior colleagues.
Yes.
But well, that aside, there are also other laws like this recently, the computer misuse. You can see how much damage it is caused.
Yes.
Yeah, for everyone. But even journalists have not been spared. So that aspect of the legislation hasn't been as conducive. Then you will look at the violations that are being highlighted in most of the reports that come out. The assaults to journalists, attacks on journalists, especially at the United Nations, the Human Rights High Commissioner the Office for the Human Rights High Commissioner. When people were battered, the young girl is still moving on a stick. That doesn't reflect progress. Yeah, when you have somebody injured and nobody is following up to assess her health situation.
Asking for accountability.
So there has been a lot of impunity that doesn't really reflect that there is positive progress. The poor kind of structural setup.
Yes.
When it comes to regulation, you have police storing orders, you have police and the army pushing journalists to determine what to publish.
Yes.
You get, not which are not constitutionally mandated bodies.
Yes.
Eh? UCC is also throwing its directives here. And all other, other actors that tend to have a grip on a sector that is supposed to work with non-interference and to be independent.
Yes.
So those are kind of challenges, really, that you can't, that can't go without being hinted upon. When it comes to like positives, you can say people are trying. The media sector working group recently was formed, but I must say it's still moribund. It's not as effective.
Yes.
It's just perhaps a club of people who converge to just do a reflection. Without meaningful decisions that are supposed to be followed up upon, because beyond sitting, it is both state and non-state. It has people in ICT coming together,
yes,
and others, but it's not coming with concrete solutions to support the industry.
You did mention that you have some issues with the Journalism Act, and you said number one is registration and getting of licenses. Yeah. But wasn't the act put in place to streamline the professionalism within the industry? Because there are instances where media houses or journalists have put out fake news.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. That there have been instances of unprofessionalism, but in progressive societies and democracies, there is the concept of self-regulation. Yeah.
But how many times is it followed? How many times do people follow self-regulation or self-restraint?
Self-regulation is so key.
Yes.
Because it is also a liberal kind of environment. Eh? Mm-hmm. Yeah. People are free. People have freedoms. And therefore, they understand the scope within which they can exercise and push and enjoy their freedoms. Mm-hmm. So,
and even the market itself will vote you out. I mean, if people think you're giving us fake news all the time, yeah, they'll stop listening to you, they'll stop giving you advice, they'll stop buying your paper or whatever it is. Yes. I mean, there are all those controls that you cannot deny.
Yes, that is true. That is true, but there are also a section of people who just live for the drama, who love to be a part of the mob and incite the violence. So that is what I mean. Because when I talked about press freedoms, but because even in our freedom of speech, there should be limitations, because I just can't come out to be disrespectful of you. But do people understand that? Just talk about self-regulation, but how often do people self-regulate
We have
themselves?
The Media Council, and one of its mandates is that, to regulate. Mm-hmm. But the unfortunate bit with the council, which I have observed over time, is that it seems to be schizophrenic. It does not understand its role. It is more of, say, a gagging kind of poster boy of the state than regulating, ensuring that there is discipline and constant discourse for people to be able to practice journalism in a manner that is really very acceptable. But for it is looking at who is talking much, now they come for you. Mm-hmm. Who is here, they come for you. The state uses them to go and be able to crack down. It's not supposed to be like that. Because we can draw parallels. There are other countries where there is a similar structure that even for it, when journalists' rights are violated, it is at the forefront of tasking the state to explain. But here, ours goes, when somebody is accused, it goes for you.
Yes.
So I think there is a way we need to look at how this council is doing its work, and good enough. There is space now in the working group where we always push these things across, and we hope they hear.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it's also less facilitated. You need to have resources. You know, this is a game of resources. You need to have, human resource.
Yeah, but is it, for Moses, my issue with the Media Council, and same with the Press and Journalist Act in its entirety.
Yes.
And in tandem with the Uganda Communications Act. In law, there is something they call the purpose and effect rule, that when you challenge the legality or the constitutionality of a statute, then the courts will look at the purpose of the statute. So why was it put in place? If the purpose is illegal, it's unconstitutional, then the courts will strike it at that point.
Yes.
But sometimes on the face of it, the purpose is actually legitimate. And say, no, but I think the purpose is okay. Then they look at the effect. In implementing this law, what are the effects we have seen? And if the effects are illegitimate, if they're unconstitutional, then the courts will strike it out. Now, for me, that is where I look at the Press and Journalist Act. A lot of the things seem okay at face value, but when you look at the effect when they're implemented, it just restricts press freedom.
Yes.
It just becomes unconstitutional. At some points, it becomes manifestly criminal. It criminalizes itself from the word go. If you look at the Uganda Communications Act, the role of the UCC, you look at problems there. If you look at the Media Council, there's problems there. The effect, just the effect of what they're doing, the summation of what they're doing, the sum total of their activities and objectives is really illegal, it's unconstitutional, it must be challenged. So for me, I think there is a lot, so I think we need even to discuss a lot more with the Human Rights Network for Journalists and say there are lots of laws here that need to be challenged. They should not be left. UCC is doing so much that's illegal. It is so big, it is so overbearing, and like, wait a moment, where do you get the powers?
Yes.
Which constitution are you operating under? These things must be questioned, and I think it is time that we had a deeper conversation and saying, is this the kind of country that we want? Now, the overriding problem again goes to the issue of the very small issue of governance, that you have people who have entrenched themselves in power. They don't want to leave power. So they want to do everything possible to stay in power. They want to do everything possible to gag those who attempt to express dissent or to show any kind of resistance to the activities. And that is at the core of everything that happens in this country. Because all the power, is the way it's organized and exercised, is about somebody staying in power. And this, we should be, as citizens, we must condemn it as wrong. If you look at the way resources are deployed, the way resources are distributed and redistributed, there is a problem. We need to say that this is wrong as a country. We cannot run a country like this if we want a sustainable government, a sustainable country, if we're looking at a country that will, 1,000 years from now, still be standing.
Yes.
I think there's problems that we need to address, and I think we need to have meaningful conversations without fear or favor, to call a spade, so that we can have a country that we shall leave our children in, and we shall have a peace of mind that they will be okay.
That's true. Thank you so much. So as we wind up this segment, any closing remarks for the viewer?
I will perhaps supplement on what Senior has talked about. Governance is key.
Okay.
By just making a comparative analysis between countries, you will see those that apply the democratic model of media practice, and the one of social responsibility, that adheres to social responsibility, you will see these countries are doing well. So, what's my point? My point is that governance is so sacrosanct with whatever we want to do.
Yes.
With the kind of media that we want to do that is free and that is so empowering to the citizens. You look at the conceptual West, you know, talk of the United States, UK, where, and you see how you admire to be like Aman Paul.
Yes.
Don't you see? And what she speaks out and speaks out boldly, and many other prominent journalists. So it's what we should aim at. And if I to borrow from the political theory bit, school of thought, political science and all that.
Yes.
There's what they call the constitutional order and the proletarian order. So most countries that are not democratic, they tend to use the sword. The sword to control, to regulate.
Yes.
The sword, and that's the military, all these security groups. So they will gag all these media houses and and they don't empower you. So what my brother stands for, I can see him speaking passionately about it.
Yes.
You know, in the developing sub-Saharan Africa, some of these, even when we come here and pronounce ourselves and talk about all legal jargon,
Yes.
I am telling you, my brother, these men don't listen. To be honest with you, and I'm sure you have faced it firsthand. Right. Here in Africa and some countries, the authoritarian regimes, they don't.
Yes.
They don't, and we really sometimes also now perhaps demand for better governance, because one of its net effect
Yes.
brings about enjoyment of freedom. So governance is also key.
Is key.
Yeah.
All right. And how about you, Council? Any closing remarks for the viewer, briefly?
No, I just want to remind people of Mr. Thomas Jefferson, who was, I think, the third president, or was it the fourth, of the United States.
Yes.
He said, if we're given a choice to choose a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would not hesitate to choose the latter. That is, newspapers and no government.
Yeah.
Is much, much better. That tells you how important press freedom is, and I would like to wish everyone happy World Press Freedom Day.
All right, thank you so much. Well, there you had it. I was joined in studio by Mr. Magola Moses, and he's the Deputy Executive Director of Human Rights Network for Journalists in Uganda, and Council Gawaya Tegule, veteran journalist and human rights lawyer. Well, thank you for staying tuned to this segment of the Twitter Jobs, but coming up is our views. Keep watching Sunrise at Sea.